Today, we're going to tackle a big one, the story behind Sound of Freedom. You've probably heard of it, right? It's the little indie film that somehow became one of the most successful and, yeah, one of the most controversial movies we've seen in a long, long time.
So, this is the big question, isn't it? How did a small, independent film, a movie most people hadn't even heard of, suddenly become Hollywood's worst nightmare? We're talking about a film with a pretty small budget that didn't just do well, it completely shattered all expectations and basically lit a match to a massive cultural firestorm.
Just look at this number. We're talking over $250 million. And get this, it was made for only about $14 million. That is an absolutely insane return on investment. I mean, to put that into perspective, it was pulling in numbers that put it right up there with giants like Indiana Jones and Mission Impossible that came out the same year. For an indie film, it's pretty much unheard of.
All right, Section 1, a journey against the current. So you gotta be asking, how in the world did this happen? Well, the film's road to the big screen was rocky, to say the least. I mean, this is a wild story of getting rejected by basically everyone in Hollywood, then being saved by a totally unexpected studio, and using a game-changing release strategy that turned its audience into its biggest marketers.
Okay, so to really get what happened here, you have to go back in time a bit. Filming on this thing was actually finished way back in 2018. Fox originally picked it up, but then Disney bought Fox in 2019. And just like that, the movie got shelved. Stuck in corporate limbo. It happens all the time with these huge mergers. For years after that, the creators tried to sell it to anyone who would listen. Netflix, Amazon, you name it. And every single one of them said no. The movie was, for all intents and purposes, dead.
That is until Angel Studios came along. Now, these guys are not your typical Hollywood studio, not even close. They have a totally different way of doing things. They skip the big corporate gatekeepers and get their funding directly from their audience through crowdfunding. And for Sound of Freedom, something like 7,000 regular people, investors they call angels, chipped in to raise the $5 million needed to buy the rights back from Disney. They literally rescued this film from the shelf. So once they had the film, their release plan was pure genius. It was this marketing masterclass called Pay It Forward. Here's how it worked. At the end of the movie, you were encouraged to buy extra tickets for people who couldn't afford them. And this wasn't just some feel-good charity thing. No, it was brilliant. It turned every single person in the audience into a promoter and a backer. It made you feel like you were part of this bigger cause, this movement, not just someone who saw a movie. And guess what? It kept theaters full, which meant cinemas couldn't just drop the film after a week. It created this amazing viral loop that just kept the momentum going. Okay, Section 2, the case against the film. Now, with all that massive success came some equally massive criticism. I mean, the backlash from mainstream media and experts on trafficking was intense. And when you really look at it, the arguments against the movie kind of fall into three main buckets. So what were those buckets? Well, first, there's the guy the movie's based on, Tim Ballard. Second, there's the whole question of whether the film's portrayal of trafficking is even accurate. And third, and this is a big one, is its connection to the QAnon conspiracy movement. So let's start with the man himself, Tim Ballard. In the movie, he's portrayed as this absolute hero, right? A former government agent on this noble, righteous quest. But when you look at the real story, well, things get a lot more complicated. For starters, Ballard has been hit with a lot of accusations that he's exaggerated or even just made up details of his missions. A deep-dive investigation by Vice News even claimed that his methods, where his group would pose as buyers in sting operations, might have actually made the problem worse by increasing the demand for trafficked kids. And on top of all that, he eventually had to resign from his own organization, Operation Underground Railroad, after several women came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct. Now, it's important to note he has denied those claims. Okay, the second big point of criticism is about how the film actually shows trafficking. And this is where you see a really stark difference between the movie and reality. The film is all about this nightmare scenario of kids being kidnapped by total strangers from, parks and public places. It's terrifying to think about, for sure, but experts say it's also incredibly rare. And focusing on it is actually a dangerous misrepresentation of what really happens. Because in the real world, the data paints a very different picture. Anti-trafficking groups will tell you that most victims are actually teenagers, not little kids. And here's the really crucial part. In about 60% of cases, the trafficker is someone the victim knows, a family member, a friend, an acquaintance. It's someone they trust. And that much, much more common reality is almost totally absent from the movie story. So, for critics, this is the whole problem. They argue that by pushing this sensationalized stranger danger story, the film creates a kind of moral panic. It makes everyone terrified of a scenario that's statistically unlikely, and in doing so, it pulls attention and resources away from the real, complex issues that are actually at the root of trafficking.
And that brings us to the third point, which is probably the most explosive one of all, the film's connection to the QAnon movement. And a lot of this comes down to its lead actor.
Yeah, the star of the movie is Jim Caviezel. You probably know him from playing Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. Well, in recent years, he's become a very vocal supporter of a central and completely baseless QAnon conspiracy theory about something called adrenochrome. So what is it? It's this bizarre belief that there's a global cabal of elites who torture children to harvest a chemical from their blood, which they think makes them younger and more powerful. Now, to be perfectly clear, the movie itself never, ever mentions this. But because its star, Caviezel, talks about it so much in public, the film became inextricably linked to the movement in people's minds. It turned into a huge rallying cry for QAnon followers.
And so we get to our final section, fuel for the culture war. Because at this point, what happened next was almost inevitable, right? This whole thing stopped being a debate about a movie. It wasn't about acting or directing or even factual accuracy anymore. It just became another front in the American culture war.
And this really shows you the massive divide. On one side, you had the supporters who saw a brave film telling a hidden truth that Hollywood desperately wanted to bury. For them, the fact that the movie struggled for so long to get released was all the proof they needed. But on the other side, you had critics who saw it as dangerous propaganda that was using a really serious issue to push a political agenda and conspiracy theories. And here's the craziest part. In the end, all that controversy became the film's best marketing. It created this feedback loop. The more the critics attacked it, the more its supporters rallied to defend it, seeing every negative review as proof that they were trying to silence it. This us versus them feeling was incredibly powerful. It made people feel like going to the theater wasn't just about seeing a movie. It was about making a statement, about taking a stand.
So that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Was Sound of Freedom just a movie that got unlucky and was caught in the crossfire of our polarized times? Or was it a cause that, whether on purpose or by pure accident, figured out how to use the culture war like rocket fuel to become this massive, unprecedented success? The answer, just like everything else about this film, is still being fiercely debated.